The first element of checkpoint 6 is the daily reflections on your lesson plans. Each day that you teach, you're going to want to come in and make some notes on key observations that you noticed, what you recognize as needs from your formative assessment data, making adjustments to plans for the next day. Don't let that wait because it's really hard to recreate it after the fact. These questions really help you make informed decisions about how you want to adjust instruction day to day during your unit. So when we talk about those reflection questions, they're at the bottom of the lesson plan, and we are going to talk just a little bit more about how to make the most of that opportunity.
So be sure that you refer to the specific questions at the bottom of the lesson plan template. Some key tips to keep in mind are that we are looking for evidence. So avoid phrases like most of them, or the students seem to get it, or they were all engaged. That's great, but instead say 17 of the students answered the questions correctly on the exit slip, or 3 students struggled to come up with the appropriate answer according to the checklist. Notice the inclusion of specific data. So let's take a look at how to move from an acceptable reflection to a target response.
So I'm looking at a response right now, and we notice that it says overall today's lesson went well. Now we need to add some detail to that. What did that really mean? And in looking at this first paragraph in this response, Carol, what do you notice went well during that day's lesson?
It's clear that the problem-solving activity had the students engaged, and they were interested, and they were generating a lot of appropriate answers. Let's see, and then, well, I'm glad that you gave a specific example of launching the giant balloons of water. That's a great response from your students. And then you moved on to say several groups began to get at the idea of digging trenches and using pipes, that you really got more specific.
Yes, and I thought it was important that this author actually gave some detail about and gave us some insight into the lesson. When I'm reading, I kind of want to be able to see the students and the teacher interacting around a key part of the lesson. I think that's so nice to hear. In this next paragraph, though, this is where we identify some of those phrases that were kind of problematic for a target response. And the first one that jumps out at me is most of the students mastered the objective. So if we're thinking about how to make that more specific, what could we do?
Well, first of all, if you turned this into me, I would circle most and write how many.
Okay.
What does most mean?
So would you say 17 of 21?
If that's the data you have, that's what I want to see.
Okay, so we would say 17 of the 21 students mastered the objective, that they would be able to draw an aqueduct. Should I tell you how I know that?
Yes, please.
Okay, so I might say, as evidenced by the exit slip each student completed at the end of the lesson. Is that more specific?
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
So I'm guessing several needs to be more specific as well.
Exactly.
Okay, so
how many is several?
I'm gonna say 6. And now that I'm thinking about that, you know, I used several, but I'm realizing that 6 is actually over a fourth of the class, and that's bigger than I thought. Sometimes when we use language like several or some, we lose track of the detail and how many students we're really talking about. So 6 of 21 students had trouble explaining the importance of aqueducts. The issue was that they couldn't explain the importance of moving water. And that's really a key idea. It's not that the Romans wanted to build these big aqueducts, is that they served a very functional purpose and a purpose we still use today. So that was a key piece of understanding that didn't quite happen.
Absolutely, and that's what we want to know, the specific things that your students either understood and you feel like they mastered, or the things they struggled with, and we need to have that numeric data to justify your comments.
The next question asks you to think about if you're ready to move ahead with your lesson or if you need to reteach some concepts. And please know that what's really respected here is your careful observation of your formative assessment data and making a responsible decision about what your students need. If they didn't get some key pieces of information, it's really important to note that in your reflection and make a plan for catching them up. That's going to happen even to the best teachers. And proficiency means that we know what to do when that happens. So right now, this response says, I will move ahead with the lesson planned for tomorrow. It includes a brief vocab review of the term aqueduct and should be all we need to keep moving forward. The students who made errors on the exit slip will be allowed to correct their response and resubmit. So there's a preliminary little strategy in there, but I'm suspecting that there's more work to be done in this question.
My first question would be, what are you going to do for the 6 students who struggled? Are we just going to move ahead and just leave them in the dust? I don't think so. So I want you to specifically tell me what you are going to do for those 6. Is this a chance for some alternative teaching? Are you planning to review in the same way you did the day before? If they didn't get it yesterday, they may not get it today if you take the same approach. Tell me if you're going to try a different strategy, and if so, what that strategy is going to be.
Okay, so what I'm hearing you say is that I will move ahead with the lesson plan for tomorrow. Wait a second. What are we doing for the 6 students who still don't have this content at mastery? Be specific about instructional strategies. And I think that's an important comment to make and an important observation for me, because I thought I had kind of done that when I said the students who made errors on the exit slip will be allowed to correct their response and resubmit. But what I hear you saying is that that's not really teaching. That's just revising.
It's not teaching. And the other aspect of that that concerns me is that if you hand the exit slip back and say, okay, Jeremy, you can correct this, how do I know that Jeremy isn't going to turn to Hannah and say, what's the right answer, and just write something down to turn it in just to turn it in? I really want you to be very intentional about collecting that group of 6, whether it's all 6 together or 2 groups of 3. You know your students. I don't know who's in that group. But I want you to make some thoughtful professional decisions about those 6 students and how we're going to catch them up with effective teaching practices.
So here, I might consider some instructional practices. Will I reteach? And when will I use morning work or alternative teaching during social studies? These are some of those questions I could address to make this a stronger evidence of my decision making as a teacher.
Exactly.
So, for the third question, if you have to teach this lesson again, what might you do the same and what might you do differently? And right now I've said the lesson went very well and the students were so engaged. I think I would do most of it the same. Next time I might make one of the parallel groups a little smaller and one a little bigger so that I can pay better attention to some of the students who need extra help. I wouldn't put all of them in the same group together. I just think that it would be helpful if a couple of them were strategically placed in a parallel group that was a little bit smaller, it would help the teacher. I would also make sure the groups were designed more strategically so that no students felt intimidated. For example, I worry that Melissa and Carol might have been too shy with their partners to really get involved. When we look at that paragraph, what's the missing detail there, do you think?
Well, several things need some revision there, but the first thing that jumped out at me was the lesson went very well and students were so engaged. I want to know what that looked like. Tell me how you knew your students were engaged. Remember, I wasn't there. I didn't see it. I want to know what that looked like.
Okay.
The second thing is I think I would do most of it the same. Even the very best teacher in the world can always think of something that he or she could do a little differently that would make the lesson either go more smoothly or the instruction be more effective. There's always room for improvement and always an opportunity to be creative about how to switch things up to make it better. So you did talk about a change that you would make in the very next breath, but I would guard against saying things like, I would do most of it the same.
So maybe if instead I said, I liked the problem-solving scenario because the students really got excited about brainstorming solutions. So instead of saying I would do most of it the same, tell you what I liked.
Exactly.
Okay.
That's a great place to start, is to say this part worked really well and tell me why or how you know that it worked well. And I like your comment about brainstorming solutions because that tells me that their excitement and their engagement was directed to the content, not just the fact that they were hanging out with their buddies in a small group.
Yes. So, and then I move in and talk about things that I would change. And so now I've started to make a little bit, so if I go in and add this, what did it look like, and then I tell you what I liked, that's going to improve this entry.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And I do think that the next section where you talked about tweaking the groups a little bit, that's very thoughtful, and it tells me that you are really paying attention to individual students, that you noticed that Melissa and Carol may need to be in a different group, and you told me why.
Okay.
Well done.
Okay. And how about the vocab work? Is that important? Should I be noting something as specific as a strategy like vocabulary instruction?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And I also like that you specifically went on. You didn't just say vocab work was really important and beneficial. You told me how. Using cards to break down the word aqueduct helps students make sense of that term. Great.
So if you followed those tips, that's a great start for getting to a target score for your daily reflections.
That's it.